on the news. You need to know this. After 17 days of protests, reports indicate that Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak may announce tonight that he will step down as leader of Egypt. The announcement comes in response to another day of protests after nearly 3 weeks of civil unrest. Massive labor protests took place all over the country, virtually shutting Egypt down yesterday. The petroleum, railway, telecommunication, and steel sectors are all reporting labor disruptions today. And there's fear that the Suez Canal could get shut down, threatening oil distribution all around the world. But with people of all ages, women, and both labor organizations and government workers now involved in the anti-government movement, the pressure on Mubarak has reached a tipping point. The world is watching Egypt. Let's hope democracy prevails. GOP Budget Chairman Paul Ryan, the guy who wants to privatize Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security and drop the highest income tax bracket by 18%, or 15% rather, and raise the lowest tax bracket by 12%, he released his budget proposal for next year and includes $32 billion worth of cuts. So who specifically are the Republicans targeting for these cuts? Women and children. The GOP wants to cut $758 million from the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, known as WIC. That amounts to a 6% cut in food assistance for poor women and their children. The GOP wants to cut $210 million from maternal and child health block grants, reducing health access to pregnant women and children by 33%. The GOP wants to cut $27 million from the Poison Control Center, virtually eliminating a crucial program that saves lives all across the country. Also, the GOP is targeting community health centers that mainly assist low-income children with a $1.1 billion cut. All these cuts add up to $2 billion. Our nation's annual deficit is 700 times that, $1.6 trillion. Essentially, it won't have any effect on bringing down the deficit whatsoever. However, it will affect millions of disadvantaged women and children around the country who need medical services and food assistance. Nowhere in the proposal are measures to force millionaires or billionaires to make any sacrifices whatsoever, like paying a slightly higher income tax rate or raising the tax rate on their dividend checks that they receive while they sit around the pool waiting for the checks to arrive, paying a maximum 15% income tax. And nowhere are cuts to the military, where the same amount of savings can be found by eliminating just one aircraft carrier battle group. We're seeing class warfare in this country, and the super rich are winning. In the best of the rest of the news, looks like President Obama is going along with the GOP budget cuts that disproportionately affect the poor in our nation. The White House's new budget proposal will include a $2.5 billion cut to the low-income energy assistance program. This is the program that helps poor families pay to stay warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Last December, President Obama extended the Bush tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires for another 2 years. That cost us $75 billion, roughly 30 times more than the $2.5 billion that the president says we now can't afford to spend on poor families who need energy assistance during this brutal winter. 74 members of Congress penned a letter to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas asking him to recuse himself should the High Court take up the issue of Obamacare. Justice Thomas's wife, Ginny, recently started a new lobbying firm called Liberty Consulting with the purpose of bringing, quote, voices of principled citizens in the Tea movement into the halls of Congress through governmental affairs efforts. Considering that she will likely be paid by organizations to convince members of Congress to repeal the health care law, there will certainly be considerable incentive for Justice Clarence Thomas to rule against the law should it come to the Supreme Court. The bias here couldn't be any more obvious, and the federal recusal statute, the law by which judges are supposed to operate, clearly states, quote, any justice, judge, or magistrate judge in the United States shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality may reasonably be questioned. For example, if his spouse is known by the judge to have an interest that could substantially affect the outcome of a proceeding. Of course, this statute didn't prevent Justice Thomas from ruling on Bush v. Gore back in 2000 that handed George W. Bush the presidency, even though his wife worked for the Bush transition team. And it didn't prevent Thomas from hearing the Citizens United case last year, even though he often takes part in political strategy organizations put together by billionaire Koch brothers who benefit directly from the Supreme Court's ruling in that case. We're seeing flat-out corruption on the highest court in our land. The Constitution of the United States gives Congress the power to oversee the duties of the Supreme Court, and if 74 members of Congress ask Thomas to step down, then he should. Better yet, those 74 members of Congress should be calling on him to be impeached. The Los Angeles Times editorial page is targeting Republican Congressman Peter King, the new chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. King plans to hold hearings on his new committee to investigate American Islamic communities and potential radical forces within them. But as the Times points out, King hasn't identified such a threat, and certainly not at a level that would justify singling out any one religion to be targeted for religious scrutiny. That's right, it's simple. King is trying to be today's Joe McCarthy. And instead of communists, it's Muslims. Last week, controversy surrounded the GOP's attempts to redefine rape in an effort to limit federally funded abortions around the country. By narrowing the definition of rape to forcible rape, a majority of rape victims would no longer be eligible to receive federal assistance for abortion procedures. After a massive backlash, the GOP has promised to remove the provision, but now it looks like it's still there. And that's the way it is today, Thursday, February 10th, 2011. I'm Tom Hartman on the news.